When I met Lily, I thought I hit the jackpot. She had this way of lighting up a room, making everyone feel like they mattered, especially me. We got married young, me with my ambitious plans to start a business, her with dreams of being the rock behind a successful man. And for a long time it worked. We weren't rich at first, but I worked hard, building my small construction business from the ground up. We didn't come from much. I grew up in a blue-collar household where every penny counted, so I knew the value of hard work. My business started small, fixing up kitchens, repairing decks, and doing odd jobs. It wasn't glamorous, but by the time I turned 35, I'd grown it into something real. Multiple crews, big contracts, and enough to buy Lily the kind of home she always dreamed of. Our kids, Emma and Tyler, were my world. I'd get home late most nights, but I'd always find time for bedtime stories or a quick game of catch. Sundays were sacred family days, pancakes in the morning, park trips in the afternoon. It was the kind of life I'd always wanted. Lily seemed happy, or at least I thought she was. She loved throwing parties, decorating the house, and being the perfect hostess. She was great at it too. People loved her. I was proud to stand beside her at every event, thinking how lucky I was to have a woman like her in my life. But looking back, there were signs. Little things that didn't add up, the way she always seemed to need more attention, more clothes, more trips. I worked overtime to give her everything, but somehow it was never enough. I told myself that's just how people are, always chasing the next thing. If I'm honest, I was proud of being the provider. It felt good knowing I'd built this life for us. So, I ignored the little cracks. Like how she spent more time on her phone than talking to me some nights. Or how she'd be out late with friends more and more often. I figured we were just busy, caught up in the whirlwind of life, like any couple. I never thought I'd be the guy blindsided by betrayal. I never thought I'd lose everything I worked for. Not just the money, but the trust, the family, the life I built. I didn't see it coming. Not until it was far too late. It started small. A late-night text here, a suspicious glance there. I'd notice Lily smiling at her phone, quickly locking the screen when I walked into the room. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have private conversations, right? But then there were the late nights out with the girls. She'd come home hours later than usual, smelling like perfume that wasn't hers, her hair slightly disheveled. I chalked it up to stress. Life was busy. She needed an outlet. Besides, I trusted her. Or maybe I didn't want to admit that I was starting to doubt her. Then one night, I found the first undeniable clue. I had come home earlier than expected from a business trip. The house was dark except for the soft glow of her laptop on the kitchen counter. Lily wasn't in the kitchen, but her screen was still open. Curious, I glanced at it, and there it was, a message. Can't wait to see you again this weekend. Last night was unforgettable. I'll bring the wine this time. My stomach dropped. It was signed with a man's name I didn't recognize. I froze, rereading it, hoping I'd misunderstood. But no, it was there in plain text. I wanted to storm upstairs, confront her right then and there, but part of me hesitated. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe I didn't have the full story. So I saved the message, screenshot it, sent it to my own email for safekeeping. I needed proof before I did anything rash. The following days were torture. Every time I looked at her, my mind raced with questions. Was she lying to my face? Was she still sneaking around? I tried to act normal, but my patience wore thin. When she smiled at me, I wondered if it was fake. When she hugged me, I questioned whether her heart was in it. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I brought it up as calmly as I could. "Lily, who's James?" I asked, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. Her face froze for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. "James. Oh, he's just someone from the PDA. Why do you ask?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the screenshot of the message. "Does this look like something you'd send to someone from the PTA?" Her eyes darted to the screen, then back to me. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. But then she did what I'd later realize was her specialty. She lied. "Oh, that. It's nothing," she said with a dismissive laugh. "James is married, Denny. We were planning a PTA wine tasting event for the parents. You're reading way too much into this." My gut told me she wasn't telling the truth, but her casual tone made me second-guess myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was blowing things out of proportion. But before I could respond, she deflected. "Honestly, Denny, You've been so distant lately. Always working, always stressed. Maybe you should spend less time looking for problems and more time focusing on us. And just like that, I became the bad guy. I tried to let it go, but the seeds of doubt were firmly planted. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more signs. Her phone never left her side, even when she showered. She started dressing up more, spending extra time on her makeup, even for casual outings. I decided to dig deeper. I hated feeling like a snoop, but I needed answers. One evening, when she left her phone unattended, I unlocked it using her passcode, something I had memorized long ago but never thought I'd need. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. And there it was, plain as day. Entire conversations with James. Flirty, intimate, full of inside jokes I didn't recognize. They talked about places they'd been together, things they'd done. She even mentioned me in passing, describing me as distracted and too busy to notice. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a casual flirtation. It was a full-blown affair. When Lily came downstairs that night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked, my voice cold and flat. Her face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Lily. I saw the messages. I know everything." She stammered, trying to find the right words. "It's not what you think, Denny. I mean, yes, we've been talking, but it's not serious. It was just, I don't know, something to make me feel alive again. I didn't mean for it to happen." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, lying to our kids, and all you can say is you didn't mean for it to happen." She started crying, but I couldn't tell if it was out of guilt or just because she'd been caught. "I'm sorry, Denny. I am. But you've been so wrapped up in work, I felt like I didn't matter anymore." James made me feel seen. Her words stung, but what hurt more was the realization that she wasn't denying it. She was justifying it, trying to make it my fault. I didn't know what to say, so I just walked out of the room, leaving her there sobbing. Upstairs, I checked on the kids, who were fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their home. As I sat alone in the dark that night, I realized this was only the beginning. The truth was out, but the consequences were yet to come. The days following my confrontation with Lily were a blur. We didn't talk much, she avoided me, and honestly, I avoided her too. When we crossed paths in the house, there was this unbearable tension, like a rubber band stretched so tight it was ready to snap. But the kids were always around, and I didn't want to bring them into this mess. I still hadn't decided what I was going to do. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to have made up her mind. She shifted from apologetic to defensive almost overnight. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, she broke the silence. "Denny, I've been thinking, maybe we should go to therapy. Work on our communication. We owe it to the kids to try." Her words sounded rehearsed, calculated even. Therapy? Really? After everything, she thought this was just a communication issue? "Lily, this isn't about communication," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You had an affair. You lied to me. Therapy isn't going to erase that." She sighed, exasperated. "I made a mistake, okay? But I'm trying to fix it. You're the one who's shutting me out now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Fix it? You're still blaming me, Lily. Do you even hear yourself? You're only sorry you got caught." Her expression hardened. "You know what, Denny? You're not perfect either. You're always working, always stressed. When was the last time you made me feel special? You think just providing for this family is enough." There it was. The same tired excuse. I wanted to argue, to yell, to remind her of all the nights I worked late to give her the life she wanted. But I stopped myself. What was the point? I just shook my head and walked away, leaving her standing there with her arms crossed. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of everything was crushing me. I thought about Emma and Tyler, how they'd be caught in the middle of this mess no matter what I decided. I thought about the years I'd spent building a life for Lily and the kids, only to have it crumble like this. The next morning, Lily tried a different tactic. She was all smiles at breakfast, acting as if nothing had happened. She packed the kids' lunches, kissed them on the head, and chatted with them about their day. It was infuriating, watching her pretend everything was fine. As soon as the kids were out the door, her facade dropped. "We need to talk," she said, sitting down at the table across from me. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew where this was going. She sighed, her tone softer now. Denny, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But we can't just keep avoiding each other. We need to figure out what's next. What's next? I repeated, the bitterness seeping into my voice. I don't know, Lily. What's next? You keep lying, or maybe you start sneaking around with James again. Or maybe I just roll over and pretend none of this happened. She flinched but didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. I ended it with James. I haven't spoken to him since that night. Do you really expect me to believe that? I asked, folding my arms. Her eyes narrowed. You don't trust me. I get it. But I'm telling you the truth. I want to fix this, Denny. For us. For the kids. Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. There was no real remorse in her voice, no genuine regret. It was all about saving face, keeping up appearances. She didn't want to fix the marriage. She wanted to fix her image. I stood up, pushing my chair back a little harder than I meant to. Lily, I don't know if this is something we can fix. I need time to think. She didn't stop me as I walked out the door. The rest of the week was a nightmare. I threw myself into work, taking on extra jobs just to avoid being home. But every time I came back, there she was, trying to act normal, trying to smooth things over with forced smiles and empty gestures. Then one evening, I got home late to find Lily sitting on the couch, a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up as I walked in, her face unreadable. What's this? I asked, nodding toward the papers. She hesitated before answering. It's a proposal. For a separation. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. A separation? She nodded, biting her lip. I think it's what's best for us right now. Things have been so tense, and I think we both need space to figure out what we really want. Her words were calm, measured, but they hit me like a freight train. She wasn't suggesting this for my sake or even for the kids. This was her exit strategy. I scanned the papers, my heart sinking with every page. It was all laid out: custody arrangements, financial support, even alimony. She was asking for everything. The house, the kids, a large chunk of my income. You're kidding me, I said, my voice low and steady. I'm just trying to be fair, she replied, but her tone was anything but sincere. Fair? I laughed bitterly. You cheat on me, and now you want to take everything I've worked for? How is that fair, Lily? Her expression hardened. I'm the one who's been here with the kids. Denny. I've supported you through everything, and this is how you repay me? By acting like I'm the bad guy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had twisted everything, made herself the victim in a situation she had created. Fine, I said finally, my voice trembling with anger. You want a fight, Lily? You'll get one. But don't think for a second I'm going to roll over and let you take everything from me. Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she just picked up the papers and walked upstairs, leaving me standing there alone. I knew then that this wasn't just a fight for my marriage. It was a fight for my kids, my future, my dignity. And I wasn't going to let her win. After Lily handed me those separation papers, something inside me snapped. For years, I had worked tirelessly to build the life we had, sacrificing time, energy, and even my health to make sure my family had everything they needed. And now, here she was, not only tearing apart the foundation of our family but trying to walk away with everything I had built. I took a deep breath and read through the paperwork carefully, every word cutting deeper than the last. She wanted primary custody of the kids, a hefty amount in monthly alimony, and the house. It didn't matter to her that it was the home I had put my blood, sweat, and tears into, literally, since I'd done most of the renovations myself. The kids' rooms, the backyard playset, the kitchen table where we had countless family dinners, all of it felt like it was being ripped away. It was clear that Lily was trying to position herself as the victim. In her version of the story, she was the loyal wife who had endured an emotionally distant husband too focused on work to notice her needs. She was the caring mother, the one who stayed home while I was too busy chasing money. The way she spun it, I was the villain, and she was the innocent party who deserved everything she was asking for. I had to remind myself that this wasn't the Lily I had married. Or maybe it was, and I had just been blind to who she truly was. Either way, it didn't change the fact that I needed to protect what was left of my life and my relationship with Emma and Tyler. My first step was finding a lawyer. I went with someone highly recommended, someone who wasn't afraid to fight. Sitting in that lawyer's office, explaining everything, felt surreal. Talking about the affair, the lies, the manipulation, it was like I was recounting someone else's life. The lawyer listened intently, asking questions and taking notes, but the reality hit me hard when she outlined how the courts would likely view the situation. In cases like this, she explained, the courts often favored the mother when it came to custody, especially if she had been the primary caregiver. Lily's claims about being the one who was always there for the kids would carry weight, regardless of the truth. The financial side wasn't much better. Since I was the breadwinner, the courts would likely view it as my responsibility to ensure Lily and the kids maintained their standard of living, even if Lily's actions had shattered that standard for me. Hearing this made me feel sick. It didn't matter that Lily had betrayed me or that she had been the one to destroy our family. The system didn't care about betrayal, it cared about optics, about what looked fair on paper. And Lily knew exactly how to play that game. As the divorce proceedings began, Lily's strategy became painfully clear. She painted herself as a devoted mother who had been pushed to the edge by an unfeeling husband. She claimed she had no choice but to seek emotional connection elsewhere because I had neglected her needs. It didn't matter that I had worked long hours to provide for our family or that she had been lying to my face for months, if not years. To the court, she was a sympathetic figure, and I was just another overworked, inattentive husband. The worst part was hearing her lies about the kids. She claimed I had never been involved in their lives, that I didn't spend enough time with them, that I didn't understand their needs. It was infuriating. I had been there for every milestone, Emma's first steps, Tyler's first t-ball game, every scraped knee and bedtime story. But none of that seemed to matter now. Her lawyer was ruthless, throwing out half-truths and exaggerations to make me look like a cold, distant father. And while I wanted to believe the truth would come out, I quickly realized that the truth didn't matter in these situations. What mattered was who could present the most convincing story, and Lily was doing everything she could to make sure hers was the one the court believed. The financial demands were equally brutal. She argued that since she had sacrificed her career to raise the kids, she deserved a substantial share of my income to start over. It didn't matter that she had spent plenty of that time shopping, going out, or pursuing hobbies that had nothing to do with raising the kids. The court bought her narrative, and I was ordered to pay her a sum that felt like a punch to the gut every time I saw the number. What stung the most was the custody arrangement. I didn't lose my rights as a father, but I was given limited time with Emma and Tyler. Weekends, a couple of evenings during the week. It wasn't enough. I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was losing my role as a father, the part of my life that mattered the most. Lily's demeanor throughout the process was chilling. She wasn't angry or emotional. She was calculated, determined. It was as if the woman I had loved, the mother of my children, had been replaced by a stranger who was willing to destroy me to get what she wanted. Every court appearance, every document I signed, every concession I was forced to make felt like another piece of my life being stripped away. And through it all, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gotten to this point. How had the woman who once promised to stand by me through anything become the person who was tearing my world apart? By the time the proceedings were over, I felt like a shell of the person I had been. The house was no longer mine. A significant portion of my income was now going to Lily every month. My time with my kids was reduced to a few hours here and there. But even in my lowest moments, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done fighting. I couldn't change what had happened in court, but I could control how I responded. Lily may have taken so much from me, but I refused to let her take my dignity. If she wanted to paint me as the villain, fine. I'd show her what a villain could really do. When the custody ruling came down, it was like the final blow after months of being battered. I had spent the entire process clinging to the hope that the court would see me for the father I was. Someone who had always been there for his kids, who had done everything in his power to provide for them and make their lives better. But that hope was ripped away in an instant. The judge's decision felt like a slap in the face. Lily was granted primary custody, and I was left with visitation rights. 2 weekends a month and a few hours every Wednesday evening. The rest of the time, my children would be living with her, in what used to be our house. A house I had paid for, a house I had built memories in with them. Now, I'd be reduced to a visitor in their lives. The court didn't care about the betrayal. They didn't care about the lies Lily had told or the affair she had tried so desperately to minimize. All that mattered was the fact that she had been the one spending the most time with Emma and Tyler while I was out working to support us. In their eyes, she was the more stable parent. Walking out of that courtroom, I didn't feel like a father anymore. Fathers don't get put on a schedule. They don't get told they need to ask permission to see their own kids. Fathers are supposed to be there every day, guiding, protecting, teaching. And now, I was being reduced to something less than that. The first time I picked up the kids for my weekend, I felt a strange mix of joy and devastation. Seeing their faces light up when they ran toward me in Lily's driveway was like a balm to my battered heart, but the knowledge that I'd have to hand them back to her in 2 short days lingered in the back of my mind like a dark cloud. Tyler had packed his favorite action figures, and Emma had brought a sketchbook filled with her latest drawings to show me. They were so happy, so excited to spend time with me, and I tried my best to match their energy. But the truth was, I felt like a fraud. I wasn't the dad they deserved anymore. I was just dad for the weekend, someone they'd visit when the court said they could. Back at my new apartment, I did everything I could to make it feel like home for them. Their rooms were small and bare compared to what they had at the house, but I decorated them with their favorite colors, hung up posters, and bought toys and games I knew they'd love. I even built a makeshift fort in the living room out of blankets and chairs. That weekend, I packed as much fun into 2 days as humanly possible. We went to the park, played board games, made pancakes in the shape of animals, and stayed up late watching movies. I wanted them to know that even though things were different now, I was still their dad, and I would never stop loving them. But as I drove them back to Lily's house on Sunday evening, reality hit me all over again. Tyler fell asleep in the back seat, clutching one of his action figures, and Emma stared out the window quietly, her sketchbook on her lap. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, wondering if she was old enough to understand what was happening, if she knew why her parents weren't living together anymore. When we pulled into the driveway, Lily was waiting at the door, her arms crossed. She didn't even acknowledge me as I walked the kids up to the house. Emma hugged me tightly, whispering that she couldn't wait to come back next weekend. Tyler was still groggy, so I kissed him on the head and handed him off to Lily, who barely looked me in the eye. Driving away, the emptiness of my apartment hit me like a ton of bricks. The laughter, the warmth, the chaos, all of it was gone. The silence was unbearable. I sat on the couch, staring at the toys the kids had left behind, and felt a wave of despair unlike anything I had ever experienced. The weeks between visits were even harder. I tried to call Emma and Tyler as much as I could, but Lily was always in control of when and how long I could talk to them. Sometimes, she'd say they were busy or didn't feel like talking, and I couldn't help but wonder if that was true or if she was deliberately keeping them from me. The worst part was the small ways I could feel myself slipping out of their daily lives. Tyler started soccer practice, and I wasn't there to cheer him on. Emma joined an art club at school, and I didn't get to see her first painting. They had new routines now, new memories that I wasn't a part of, and it tore me apart. One evening, Emma told me over the phone that Lily's friend had taken them out for ice cream. I felt my chest tighten as I tried to keep my voice steady, asking who this friend was. Emma didn't say much, but I knew who it had to be. James. The thought of him being around my kids, stepping into the life I had built, made my blood boil. He had no right. He didn't belong there. But there was nothing I could do. Lily was in control now, and I had to watch from the sidelines as she let him into their lives. I started to question everything. Had I failed as a father? Was I not good enough? I hated how powerless I felt, how broken the system was. A father who worked hard to provide for his family shouldn't have to fight for scraps of time with his kids, while the person who tore the family apart got to play the role of the perfect parent. But no matter how hard it got, I reminded myself that I couldn't give up. My kids needed me, even if it was only for 2 weekends a month. I made a promise to myself that I would never stop fighting for them, never stop being the father they deserved. Even if I had to rebuild my entire life from the ground up, I would make sure they always knew I was there for them. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control how I showed up for them moving forward. And that was something Lily could never take away from me. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. Every morning, I woke up with the same hollow feeling in my chest, a suffocating mix of anger, grief, and sheer exhaustion. My life as I had known it was gone. The house, the family routines, the sense of stability, all of it had been ripped away, leaving nothing but a crushing silence and a handful of memories I couldn't escape. The apartment felt more like a cage than a home. No matter how much effort I put into decorating it for the kids, it couldn't fill the void. I'd sit in the living room on those quiet weeknights, staring at the blank walls, and wonder how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The financial strain was relentless. Between the alimony and child support, there was barely enough left to cover my own bills, let alone save for the future. I had poured my entire life into building my business, and now it felt like every penny I earned was going straight to Lily, funding the lifestyle she had destroyed. What burned the most was knowing that James was likely benefiting from it. I imagined him in my house, eating meals at my table, driving around with my kids. The thought of him slipping seamlessly into the life I had worked so hard to build was almost too much to bear. Work became my refuge, but even that started to feel like a burden. I took on every contract I could, working long hours to keep myself busy. The physical labor helped dull the ache in my chest, but it also drained me in a way I hadn't felt before. I'd come home too exhausted to think, collapsing onto the couch and falling asleep with the TV still on. The kids were my only light in the darkness, but even that was complicated. Every time I saw them, it was a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost. Emma was starting to notice the tension between Lily and me. She would ask questions I didn't know how to answer, like why I wasn't at the house anymore or why Mommy seemed upset when I dropped them off. Tyler was still too young to understand, but his hugs were tighter now, like he was afraid I might disappear too. I did my best to make our time together special, but there was always a sense of urgency, a clock ticking in the back of my mind. I had so little time with them, and every moment felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The nights without them were the hardest. The silence in the apartment was unbearable. I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, replaying every argument, every mistake, every moment I had ignored the warning signs. My mind would drift to thoughts I didn't want to entertain. What if Lily had been right? What if I had been too focused on work, too distracted to see what she needed? But those thoughts never stayed long. The anger would come rushing back, a tidal wave of bitterness that drowned out the guilt. Lily had made her choices. She had lied, betrayed me, and then turned the system against me. Whatever shortcomings I had as a husband, they didn't justify what she had done. There were moments when I felt like I was unraveling. I stopped answering calls from friends, too ashamed to admit how far I had fallen. The few times I met up with someone, I'd put on a brave face, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I felt like I was crumbling. I thought about my parents a lot during this time, about the values they had instilled in me: hard work, integrity, loyalty. I had built my entire life around those principles, and yet here I was, alone, broken, stripped of everything that mattered. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey, staring at the stack of bills I could barely keep up with. The weight of it all was suffocating. I felt like I was drowning, and no matter how hard I tried to fight, the tide kept pulling me under. But then I thought about Emma and Tyler. Their faces, their laughter, the way Tyler's eyes lit up when he scored a goal at the park, or how Emma's sketches were getting better every week. They needed me. Even if the system had reduced me to a weekend father, I wasn't going to let them see me fall apart. That night, something shifted in me. It wasn't a dramatic epiphany or a sudden burst of motivation, just a quiet realization that if I let this destroy me, Lily would win. She had already taken so much from me, but I refused to let her take my relationship with my kids or my sense of self. I made a promise to myself that I would fight back, not through anger or spite, but by rebuilding. I'd pick up the pieces, no matter how long it took, and I'd show my kids what it meant to keep going, even when the odds were stacked against you. But deep down, I couldn't shake the need to reclaim some part of my dignity. Lily had humiliated me, painted me as the villain, and walked away with everything. If I was going to move forward, I needed to take a stand, not to hurt her, but to remind myself that I wasn't powerless. That's when the idea started to form. It was small at first, just a passing thought. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It wouldn't undo the damage or make up for what I had lost, but it would be my way of taking back some control. I didn't know exactly how I was going to pull it off yet, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Once the idea took root, it was all I could think about. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about principle, about making a statement. I couldn't stop Lily from taking a chunk of my income every month, but I could decide how she got it. If she wanted to bleed me dry, I'd make her work for every single cent. The plan was petty, sure, but it wasn't illegal. That was the beauty of it. I'd pay her alimony in full, just like the court ordered, but I'd do it entirely in coins. Not a check, not a bank transfer, coins. Specifically, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she was taking from me, literally. I did some calculations. Lily's alimony was a hefty sum, but nothing that couldn't fit into a couple of large containers if I planned it right. The logistics would be tricky, but that only made the idea more appealing. If she wanted to make my life difficult, I'd return the favor, one coin at a time. The first step was finding the coins. I couldn't just walk into a bank and ask for thousands of dollars in loose change without raising some eyebrows. So, I started small, visiting different branches and withdrawing manageable amounts. I told the tellers it was for a project, which wasn't entirely a lie. The coins began piling up quickly. At first, I stored them in jars, but as the collection grew, I had to get creative. I bought a couple of heavy-duty containers to hold the weight and kept them tucked away in the corner of my apartment, hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was almost therapeutic, watching the coins add up. Every time I felt the sting of what Lily had done to me, I'd count out another handful, dropping them into the container with a satisfying clink. It became my way of taking back some control, turning my anger into something tangible. As the containers filled, I started thinking about the delivery. This wasn't just about dumping a pile of coins on her doorstep. It had to be deliberate, something she couldn't ignore. I wanted her to feel the inconvenience, to understand that taking money from me wasn't going to be as easy as cashing a check. An armored truck seemed like the perfect solution. It was over the top, sure, but that was the point. I looked into hiring one, figuring out how much it would cost and what the logistics would be. Turns out, there are companies that specialize in transporting large sums of cash and coins, and they didn't ask too many questions as long as you paid the fee. Once I had everything lined up, I contacted my lawyer to make sure there wouldn't be any legal blowback. I explained the plan, not in full detail, just enough for her to know I wasn't breaking any rules. She was skeptical at first, but after confirming that payment in coins was perfectly legal, she gave me the green light. The day I scheduled the delivery, I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. This was more than just a petty stunt, it was a declaration. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't undo what Lily had done, but I could make damn sure she didn't walk away thinking she'd won. The hardest part was keeping it a secret. Every time I saw Lily during my brief interactions with the kids, I had to hold back a smirk. She had no idea what was coming, no idea that all the power she thought she had over me was about to be challenged in the most ridiculous, satisfying way possible. I rehearsed how the delivery might play out in my head over and over. I pictured the truck pulling up to her driveway, the containers being unloaded, and the look on her face when she realized what was happening. Would she be angry? Embarrassed? Would she call me childish? Maybe. But for once, she'd be the one dealing with the fallout, not me. As the day approached, I made sure everything was in order. The coins were counted and packed, the truck was scheduled, and I had triple-checked that every cent was accounted for. I wanted to make sure there were no excuses for her to claim I hadn't fulfilled my obligations. This wasn't about getting even, it was about making a statement. Lily had taken so much from me, turned my life upside down, and left me to pick up the pieces. I couldn't stop her from walking away with what the court said she was entitled to, but I could make sure she never forgot where it came from. And on delivery day, I was ready. Ready to watch the spectacle unfold, ready to take back some small part of my dignity, and ready to remind her that I wasn't the pushover she had assumed I was. The morning of the delivery, I woke up earlier than usual, my nerves buzzing with anticipation. It wasn't just another alimony payment, it was my message, my stand, and maybe, in a way, my closure. I had planned every detail, down to the minute. The armored truck was scheduled to arrive at Lily's house around midday, just when she'd be home to receive it. I'd called ahead to the company, double-checking the arrangements. The containers were loaded onto the truck, each one carefully packed to the brim with quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. I made sure they'd include a receipt, noting that every cent of her alimony had been fulfilled. Legal, precise, and impossible for her to reject. As the truck pulled out from the depot, I followed it at a safe distance in my car. I didn't want to miss a second of what was about to unfold. My heart was racing the entire drive, but it wasn't fear or regret, it was exhilaration. After months of being steamrolled by the system, by Lily's manipulation, and by my own helplessness, I finally felt like I was taking a little bit of power back. When the truck turned into her driveway, I parked a few houses down, out of sight. I could see Lily's house clearly from where I was, her familiar white porch and the big windows I used to look out of every morning. The truck came to a stop, and two workers got out, walking up to her door. It didn't take long for Lily to appear. She opened the door with that polished, aloof look she always wore when she wanted to seem in control. From where I sat, I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see her body language shift almost immediately. The delivery workers gestured toward the truck, and her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then they started unloading. The containers were heavy, and it took both workers to carry each one up the steps and into her house. They moved deliberately, one after another, while Lily stood in the doorway, watching in disbelief. Her arms were still crossed, but now her shoulders were tense, and I could practically feel her irritation from where I sat. She stepped out onto the porch, waving her hands as if to stop them, but the workers didn't pause. They were just doing their job, and they weren't about to argue with the logistics order. One of them handed her the receipt, which she snatched out of his hand. Her lips moved quickly, likely asking questions or protesting, but the workers remained calm, pointing toward the containers and then back at the truck. Watching it all play out, I couldn't help but smirk. This was exactly what I had envisioned. Lily caught off guard, scrambling to process what was happening. For months, she had held all the cards, dictating the terms of my life, taking and taking without any regard for the damage she'd done. But not today. Today, she was the one dealing with the inconvenience, the hassle, the weight of what she demanded. As the last container was brought inside, the workers gave her a brief nod and returned to the truck. She stood there for a moment, staring after them, then down at the receipt in her hand. I imagined her realizing that there was nothing she could do, no loophole she could exploit to undo this. The alimony was paid, just not in the way she'd expected. I stayed in my car for a few minutes longer, watching as she reluctantly began dragging the containers inside. Even from a distance, I could see how heavy they were, how much effort it took to move them. She paused after the first one, leaning against the doorframe with a frustrated expression. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a sense of release. For the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt like I had taken some control back. This wasn't about hurting Lily, it was about showing her that I wasn't the passive, defeated man she thought she'd left behind. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I didn't need to. The image of her struggling with those containers, the look of disbelief on her face, was enough. I drove back to my apartment, feeling lighter than I had in months. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. I didn't open it right away, but the preview was enough. Really, Denny? This is how you want to act? I didn't reply. There was no point. I had already said everything I needed to with that delivery. Let her be angry. Let her complain. It didn't matter anymore. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept soundly. No tossing and turning. No staring at the ceiling replaying every mistake I'd made. Just peace. It wasn't about winning. I knew that. This petty act didn't erase the pain or undo the damage she'd caused. But it was a step forward, a reminder to myself that I could stand up, fight back, and find a way to move on. From here, I could focus on what mattered most. My kids, my work, and my future. Lily could keep the coins. I had more important things to build. After the coin delivery, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a triumphant feeling or some grand sense of victory. It was quieter than that. It was the sense that I had closed a chapter. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of everything Lily had done, letting her control the narrative and dictate how I felt. But now, that weight didn't feel as heavy. The revenge wasn't about getting back at her. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that I thought I'd lost. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't the end of the pain or the frustration, but it was a step toward something better. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. Work became more than just a distraction. It became a purpose. I started focusing on growing my business again, taking on bigger contracts, and building connections with clients I could actually trust. Every late night in the office, every early morning on a job site felt like a step toward regaining what I had lost. But it wasn't just about work. I started focusing on my health, too, physically and mentally. I joined a local gym, partly to burn off the lingering frustration and partly to prove to myself that I was still capable of moving forward. At first, it felt like a chore, but over time, it became part of my routine, a way to clear my mind and channel my energy into something productive. The hardest part, of course, was still the time with my kids. Those weekends were sacred to me, and I made every second count. I kept things light and fun, planning little adventures that they'd look forward to, trips to the zoo, building forts in the living room, baking cookies that always ended up slightly burnt but still delicious. Emma and Tyler were my anchors, the reason I refused to let myself spiral. They didn't see me as dad for the weekend. They just saw me as dad, the guy who cheered the loudest at their soccer games and always made the best pancakes. And that was enough for me. Even the moments that used to feel like punches to the gut started to lose their sting. When Emma mentioned Lily's friend, I didn't let it consume me the way it used to. Instead, I redirected the conversation, focusing on her art projects or Tyler's latest obsession with dinosaurs. I couldn't control what happened at Lily's house, but I could control the time they spent with me. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to struggle with the fallout of her own choices. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, the coin delivery had been the talk of the neighborhood for weeks. Some found it hilarious, others called it childish, but I didn't care what they thought. Lily had always cared deeply about appearances, and for once, she was the one left scrambling to manage them. Her messages to me became less frequent after that. The angry texts, the passive-aggressive jabs, they all fizzled out. It was as if she realized I wasn't playing her game anymore. I kept my responses short and professional, only engaging when it came to the kids. The less I gave her, the less power she had over me. But moving on wasn't just about shutting her out, it was about letting people in again. It wasn't easy at first. I had been so focused on holding myself together that I didn't realize how much I had isolated myself. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months started reaching out, and little by little, I let them back in. One evening, my old college buddy Mark dragged me out to a small bar downtown. At first, I was reluctant, but by the end of the night, I realized how much I had missed laughing, joking, and just feeling normal again. It wasn't about drowning my sorrows or pretending everything was fine. It was about reconnecting with the parts of myself that had been buried under the rubble of the divorce. Eventually, I even started dating again. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to share a meal with, someone to remind me that not all relationships ended in betrayal. It wasn't easy, and I still carried the scars of what had happened with Lily, but it felt like progress. Through it all, I kept my focus on Emma and Tyler. They were growing up fast, and I refused to miss a moment. Every time they laughed, every time they hugged me, every time they told me they loved me, it was like a balm for everything I had been through. The wounds Lily had left behind didn't disappear overnight. There were still moments when I'd catch myself replaying the worst of it, moments when the anger threatened to creep back in. But those moments became fewer and farther between. One day, as I was dropping the kids off at Lily's house, Emma turned to me with her big, innocent eyes and said, "I love spending time with you, Daddy. You always make everything so fun." Hearing that was all the validation I needed. The court might have taken time away from me, and Lily might have tried to paint me as the bad guy, but none of that mattered. My kids knew who I was, and they loved me for it. Driving away that day, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. Life wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But it was mine, and I was finally starting to live it on my own terms. Lily might have tried to take everything, but she didn't win. She didn't break me. If anything, she made me stronger. And as I looked out at the road ahead, I realized it was wide open, waiting for me to decide where to go next. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning.